everybody. This is Ross Pallone, and welcome to the second season of the Ross Around Backstage podcast, where I enjoy bringing you interviews with people who work in the entertainment business. I'm very fortunate that I've been able to make a living in the music business for over 40 years, working as a recording engineer, live sound engineer, and producer. I hope you will enjoy listening to my interviews with people who also make their living in the entertainment business. Hi, everybody. This is Ross Pallone with the Ross Around Backstage podcast. I'm here today in Las Vegas, Nevada, with my sister, Ginnie Pallone Mollner, who has made a career out of singing, and she has some very interesting stories from her career, which we're going to share with you now. So I'm going to open it up to her, and I'm going to say, Ginny, so how did you get into this business? Let's start from the beginning.
That's a good thing to start with. Well, I guess from the time I was about 5 years old, I always knew from the time I heard people singing on the radio that when I grew up, I wanted to be a singer and I wanted to be a gown girl. That's what I used to tell Mother I was going to be.
You mean, so wear like formal gowns?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I used to see these Patti Page and Rosemary Clooney and Dinah Shore and Loretta Young, and people swing around on the 50s television screen in their beautiful gowns. And when they would sing, I thought, that's what I want to do. So I can always remember going to Catholic school at the age of 5, getting on the school bus, and singing out loud in the back of the bus, "Let Me Go Lover" by Patti Page.
See, you're telling me stuff I didn't know.
Yeah, because I heard that song recently, and I thought, oh my God, that's a song I sang on the school bus when I was 5.
What did the other children do?
I don't know. They were probably sitting there wondering what's wrong with her. Because not only that, it was Catholic school, and I'm singing this romantic song by a 5-year-old. So It was really kind of funny. But I knew from that day that that's what I wanted to do. And so by the time I was, getting older, and Mom and Dad really were always so supportive of anything that any of us wanted to do, I started listening to more and more music, and eventually I would get records, and I would take them into the basement of our house.
I remember that.
Yep. And I had speakers set up and everything, and I'd go down there, and the way I learned to sing was just by singing along with people that I felt like I could not imitate, but I could sing in the same range as them.
Right, and some of those people were...
I always liked the ones that had the strong voices. So the ones I sang with the most, and I always felt like the one girl that really taught me to sing was Brenda Lee.
Okay.
Because she had this really powerful little voice. And, I listened to Annette Funicello, but Mother used to say to me, you don't want to sing like that.
So Mom had taste.
Yes, she did. Yeah. And it was like, and she was right, because it was like, I really feel that, singing to songs along with Brenda, she had such a beautiful voice, and she had power, and she knew how to express a song too. So that's where I felt like I learned the most. And we were lucky enough when we lived in Pittsburgh to befriend a disc jockey there named Jay Michael. And he was extremely popular, had his own TV show in the afternoons, and he was very closely affiliated with Dick Clark, too, so that was always a good thing.
So his show was kind of a predecessor to the Dick Clark?
Dick Clark was already on, but Jay had his I can't even remember what the name of it was, but he called himself the old Jaybird.
The Jaybird,
yeah.
Right, yeah.
And so he had this TV show, and he took, an interest in hearing me sing, because our folks told him that I could sing. And so he felt that I had some talent. So eventually they moved to Southern California, and
he got a job at a radio station.
He got a job out there. And Mom and Dad had said that, Dad was a landscaper, and in the wintertime in Pittsburgh, you didn't work.
Yeah, he had a cement contracting business.
Yeah, he had a cement contracting business, and he did landscaping before that, and neither one of those jobs ever gave him any money in the wintertime. They had 3 kids.
Right.
So eventually in 1960, they packed us all up and moved us to Southern California. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason was because they knew I wanted to be a singer, and I was only 14 years old. So when we got out there,
also wanted to get you away from your boyfriend too, didn't they?
Billy Blodgett. That was funny. Yeah. So when we got out there, and he had a lot of affiliations with different people, and he did get me a little record contract. And his wife Evelyn was a songwriter, and she wrote 2 really cute songs. And we went into the studio and made a record. And I did get airplay. We got airplay, but I can't remember. I think it was Candex Records, or I can't remember who it was, but it was sold to a pretty good size record company. But in those days, unless you had a lot of backing behind you, nobody distributed the records. So I was hearing myself on the radio a couple times. I'd turn on some channels and hear it, but nobody could buy the record. So if you don't buy the record,
yeah, you're done.
You're done.
Yeah.
So that was the end of that big recording period. But I always, sang in school, sang at all the big events they had there. Everybody always wanted me to sing. I sang at parties. I sang at everything I could sing at, because that was really my true love. And I was a good little actress too. So
you were the star of the yearly plays,
all
at
the
school,
productions at school,
and those were all musicals.
Yes, and I was always the one kid that everybody said, she's going to make it. She's going to make it. Well, I hoped so, because I certainly wasn't a scholar. Math was not my specialty.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was something I just always knew that's what I wanted to do. And so when I got out of high school, I met a guy, because I was in a play at the Glendale Center Theater. I did My Sister Eileen there.
I remember that. I went and saw it many times.
And I was around 17 years old, and I met this great guy that was 20 in that show. And he and I fell madly in love, and he did not want his future wife to be in show business.
Oh,
so
a real modern guy.
Yeah, real modern. So because I was madly in love, I said, okay. So I was going to give it all up. And Mom and Dad thought that was crazy, but they liked him. So I stuck it out with him for a while, and then he was he was drafted into the service. It was during the Vietnam War. And he eventually dumped me. And when he dumped me, that was really tough for me, because I, had given everything up that I ever wanted to do. And I thought, well, you know what? Maybe this is a blessing, because after 3 or 4 weeks of crying, I just sat up one day and said, this is my opportunity to be who I really want to be. Mm-hmm. So I had a girlfriend that had a car, and she and I went to Hollywood, and we were going to some clubs, We happened to go into this little club on the Sunset Strip called the Red Velvet Club. And the owner was standing out front. I remember that night like it was yesterday. The owner was out front talking to some girls. He was half bombed, but he was a very dynamic little person. And so my girlfriend and I went in the club, and eventually he came over and he was talking to us. And so my girlfriend is telling him, oh, you ought to hear her sing. She's a great little singer. And I was going, oh, God, I don't have any music. I don't know. I was 17, 18 years old. And so he took us into this little back room where he had me sing a cappella. And he just freaked out. He thought I was fabulous, and he said he was going to make me a star. Well, come to be, I spent 3 or 4 years in that nightclub. Mm-hmm. I became very close with him, and I actually helped him in that club for a lot of the years. I worked the front door for him, collected the cover charges, mm-hmm. and then whatever band was working in there, I would sing a few songs with them. And that club was so popular at that time. It was Tony Farah's Red Velvet Club. And all the guys that were, kind of big at that time, the Righteous Brothers came in there all the time, and Knickerbockers worked there. There were so many that I can't even remember who they all were. Well, it was a great showcase for people. People would come in there and sing. Well, Johnny Rivers used to come in there, and all of Elvis's guys used to hang out in that club. His band, mostly his bodyguards and his chauffeur, people like that. Mm-hmm. And Tony's daughter, Sandy, had dated Elvis for a while. So one night they did have Elvis come to the club. And he came in with all his bodyguards, and everybody came in. I think he was with Priscilla at that time. And that was pretty neat for me because it was on a Monday night when we had our talent show night, and I got to sing when Elvis was in the club. So that was a pretty big thing for me because not many people get to sing in front of Elvis.
No.
Unless you're somebody.
Yeah.
So that was fun. We had, I really had good times there. And Tony had good intentions to do something with a career for me, but he really didn't have the wherewithal to do anything big. But while I was working in that club, a number of people from Las Vegas would come there to find acts. The first person that came in and saw me was the old Ritz Brothers. They were an old comedy team from like the 1930s that they were going to play at the new Caesar's Palace in Nero's Nook when it first opened. And they came in and they saw me, and they needed a foil for their show, which is like a cute girl that comes out and sings a couple songs, and then they come out and make jokes with her.
Oh, okay.
So they hired me for that job. And so that was my first job.
Was that your first?
Yeah, that was my very first one going out of town.
Uh-huh.
My mother went with me, and when we got there, 2 days after I got there, I got sick.
Vegas fever, right?
Yes, Vegas throat.
What did they call it? Vegas throat.
It was February, and it was like I got this terrible sore throat, could hardly talk. The job was for 3 weeks, and I think I did 1 week of it.
Oh, boy.
So that kind of sucked. Then I went back to the Red Velvet and got another job with Jan Murray, who was an old comedy show host
right.
on
he
television.
Had a TV show.
He was around for years, yeah. And he took me to Reno with him for another 3-week gig, and that was fun. I enjoyed that, and he
were you the
liked
same
me.
doing the same kind of thing?
Same thing. I sang a couple of solos, with a little group, and then he made jokes with me.
Uh-huh.
So that was fun. And then when I got back to the club, I was doing the regular Monday night thing where I'd come out and sing a couple songs with whatever band was there. One of the agents from a show in Las Vegas saw me. His name was Cy Samuels, and he was looking for singers to sing in revues up here, because there were all kinds of lounge acts back in the 60s.
Right, and they weren't doing playback. They actually had real bands.
Live
singers.
Shows with a 5-piece band.
Yeah.
There'd be 5 or 6 little girl dancers, a couple of acts in the show, maybe a comedian, and then they'd have a singer that would come out and sing a song and then go back and then come out later and do another one. So they wanted, they liked having a young, pretty girl.
Yeah.
I got my first job in Vegas in 1967 at the Sands Playmate Review as one of the female singers, and that was an enlightening thing for me because I came to Vegas, and it was like I was such a little Mary Poppins. I was 19. I was dating a man from Hollywood that was much older than me, and I was, I was just very naive. I had never really been out of home.
Right, and you're coming to Sin City.
I'm coming to Sin City, and these girls were tough.
Yeah.
I was working with tough bunch of girls in this show. I mean, they were telling me...
Did they welcome you, or were you kind of
They called me Mary
prissy?
Poppins, let's put it that way. Yeah, they called me Mary Poppins because I dressed very, I had little high neck dresses on, and I always had a little short haircut, and I wasn't a sex bomb. I just was a very clean-cut little singer.
Yeah, the girl next door.
I was, yeah. And it was that appealed to a lot of people, but in Vegas, they wanted you to be sexier. So that was always the hard part for me because at that age, I didn't have that in me, I was never comfortable dressing sexy, and my body was different then than it is now even. I was always kind of bottom heavy. So, I'd have to come out in these shows in little short skirts, and I never felt comfortable doing those jobs. But they liked me, and
I think you looked a lot better than you thought you did.
Probably, yeah. Girls are always hard on themselves.
Hard on yourself.
I look at old pictures and go, "Well, I didn't look so bad." No, back then I thought, "Oh, she's ugly." So that's the way you feel when you're young. But I knew that I could sing. I always knew if there was one thing I could do, I could sing. And so they liked me in that show. They kept me for 10 months, and then they decided they just were going to make a change. So I went back to Hollywood. And I was never the type of girl that wanted to be one of those people that was constantly on the road. I grew up a homebody, and I like having a home base. So I kind of hated it when they let me go because I had to give up my apartment and move back to Hollywood, and I didn't know what I was going to do.
And you couldn't find another job in Vegas?
Well, no, not right then. So I went back because Tony took me back there and put me back in the club, you know. I thought, well, maybe something will come out of that. And meanwhile, while I was in there, the Knickerbockers were playing there, rock and roll group that was pretty popular at the time. And they had a organ player with them named Barry McCoy that was really cute.
Was a handsome guy.
Yes, he was. He and I started liking each other. And so I ended up, you know, starting a relationship with him. We moved in together. And then I was still working in Tony's club, though. Somebody came in that had seen me in Vegas when I was working with the Ritz Brothers. They had also, I guess, seen me when I was in the Sands Playmate Review. But then, meanwhile, Frederick Apcar decided he wanted me to come back and go into a show that he had at the Landmark. It was the Tower Suites Review. And that was going to be cool because that was a brand new hotel. And they had opened the show 6 months earlier, but they didn't like the girl singer they had for some reason. So they wanted me to do the part. Mm-hmm. So I took that job, came to Vegas, ended up, Barry and I got married. Mm-hmm. And then he went on the road with Gary Puckett in the Union Gap.
Oh, not with the Knickerbockers?
No, he left them because he got a job offer from Gary Puckett.
Oh, okay.
So he went on the road.
And Gary Puckett played at the Red Velvet Club,
yes,
too,
right?
Yes, he
did, yes. And so all these people, you know, were intertwined. So, but right after Barry and I got married, he went on the road with Gary, and I was working at the Landmark. You know, it seemed like a good situation, but I liked working and staying, you know, on even keel. I loved doing that show. It was fun. We were at the top of the Landmark. Everybody came to see it because
that was a new hotel then. That was like a very special.
It was. It was
hotel
a great little showroom at the top.
There was nothing else like it.
No.
Anywhere.
No.
Yeah, it looked like the Space Needle in Washington.
And it was right across from the Hilton where Elvis played.
Right.
And then we had a woman in the show named Faye McKay. She was a bawdy woman that came out and did a really clever 12 Days of Christmas number that made everybody talked about it in town. She was really popular. So tons of people came up to see that show. And Liberace was one of them. He was crazy about her, ended up taking her on the road with him eventually. So I just stuck it out with that show. We eventually moved that show downstairs. They took it out of the small room upstairs and moved it down into a bigger room downstairs. But I was there for a couple of years in that show. Loved doing those because it was like I was in show business, but I was also a home person.
You didn't have to travel.
No, I had my own little apartment, and I was with my husband, you know, but I was young. I would think I married him when I was 22, and he was like 25 or something. And eventually, Barry and I just had a change of view on things. He got on the road, and somebody got a hold of him and put him into some religious group that just didn't work for me. You know, it was
I remember that.
Yeah. I mean, he was speaking in tongues and praying on people, and he wanted me to leave the shows and go on the road with him and live in a commune, and it was like...
Yeah, that doesn't sound like you.
That wasn't me.
Not at all.
No.
Not at all.
No, and I had grown to really like being in Vegas. You know, it was at the time it was a small little town, and you know, like when I was at the Sands, I mean, we were partying with Sammy Davis Jr. You know, we had when Sammy would come to town, he would play at the hotels. It's so different back then than it is today, because when he would come in, he'd be there for 3 or 4 weeks, and the showroom was small that he worked in, so, you know, he'd do 2 shows a night for 3 weeks. And so while he was there, everybody, you know, he'd have parties for all the show kids. Mm-hmm. So everybody would go back to Sammy's big suite, and they'd have, you know, all these big parties, and every entertainer that was in town at the time would be there. I mean, I have letters that I wrote to our parents that talk about me sitting and having a big conversation with somebody like Della Reese but I don't remember it. So sometimes I think it's fun if you go back and try to find things that remind you of what you did, because I don't remember those things. Red buttons, and these are all people that today people don't know who
young
they
people
are.
don't know
But
about
back
them.
then,
But people
they were pretty
our
big.
age,
The Mills Brothers. It's like. I don't know. There were so many of them, and everybody knew Sammy.
Oh yeah.
So
Sammy was a big star.
Yes, he was. When I got to the Sands, Frank Sinatra had just quit working there and moved over to Caesar's Palace. So I never really,
never met Frank?
No. I did one gig one time that he was there, but I never really knew him. It was just Sammy that I knew pretty well. And we knew Buddy Greco and Louis Prima.
Oh, yeah.
Who was one of my favorites.
You ended up working on a Louis Prima show, right?
No, but we worked opposite. We were opposite at the Sands,
Oh, okay.
And it was like he really liked my singing, but he had been with Keely Smith, and then he had just remarried to a girl named Gia Mayone at the time, and they had young children. And he used to tell me every time he'd leave, he said, if I wasn't married to Gia, you'd be singing with me. And I always thought, missed it by...
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, because I really, really loved his music, and he had such talented musicians, and that show was so good. I used to go up in the light booth every night and watch them because they were so good.
Yeah, and all the shows had real musicians. And real orchestras. Some of them had
our show,
strings and horns and the whole...
No, that was the whole difference back then. Every hotel had their house musicians, and they had... In the beginning, there was no relief bands, and because nobody ever had nights off. But then the union came in and decided that people needed nights off. So then they hired two relief bands. There was the Lou Elias Orchestra and the Johnny Hague Orchestra. And those guys played one night a week at each different hotel for the bands, so they could have a night off.
Yeah.
So that's how that worked. So anyway, we were at the one at the Landmark. Okay, so then after the Landmark, then Frederick Apcar, who had also done that show, came in and decided that he was doing a new show at the Stardust called The Bare Touch of Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
And he put me in that show as his singer. And, it was like I loved it because I just kept going from one show to another, sing some new songs, but it was like I didn't have to go audition for somebody. There was always people that had to audition. Frederick kept me working from 1967 to 1981. So that was
a good run.
Pretty darn good.
Yeah,
I was very happy with that because I didn't want to go out of town, and I liked being here.
Yeah.
So Barry and I eventually, though, got divorced. And during the 3 or 4 years between husbands, I dated a slew of crazy men.
A slew?
I did. I said, I'm going to have some fun and figure this out. And at the time, I always thought I never wanted to get married again because I thought maybe, I was like, he didn't like me being in show business much either. The first guy I almost married didn't want it. And this one didn't like it either. He wanted a wife, and a stay-at-home wife. And I wasn't about to give up my career. He wanted me to go back to the commune in Ohio and make babies and, quit my job. And he wasn't good at holding a job because he kept quitting them because he didn't like being on the road. Mm-hmm. So we had just bought a house together, though, when we were getting the divorce. But he was very nice and very amicable. We split up easily. We'd only been together 3 years. Our parents had put up most of the money for that house when we bought it. So, he just kind of left and said, okay, we're done. Mm-hmm. So I was lucky with that. And so after he left, then where was I? I was in the Bare Touch of Vegas show. And I was in that for 3 or 4 years. And that was the hottest little lounge show in Las Vegas.
And that show had, if I remember right, because I think I saw that show, and I was probably too young to see it, but I saw that show, and you sang, and then there was showgirls that came out with the big giant plume ostrich feather stuff, and there was dancers.
There's always, in that one we had a lead boy dancer, which was Roger Manami, who is a phenomenal dancer that was in Vegas for many years. He went on to Broadway and did a lot of big things after he left. And in that show also was Lee Greenwood. Lee
really?
Greenwood was in our band, and he was another guy that was trying really hard to get out of Vegas and make a name for himself, and he eventually did by going country.
Yeah, sure he did. Yeah.
So, we always had a few people that, did go off and do something big. So that little show, though, was in the Stardust in this little small showroom, but it was good till the day, it ended. And I was in it for a while, and then they had a vacancy in their big showroom at the Dunes called the Casino de Paris, and they decided that they wanted to put me in that show.
Now, that was a major show.
That was the big
that was one
French
of the big,
Revue.
big
Yeah, that's
show.
the one where you have showgirls and dancers and acts. And back then, those shows, they had things in them that were just, we had 4 large horses. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I just got carried away. No, they had horses and bears and
lions too.
And huge sets, and it was touted as a cast of 100 straight from Paris. So that was kind of cool, and I was a little scared to go into it though, because at the time I'd always had a show where I had a day off, and this one I was going into was going to be 7 nights a week, with 3 shows on Friday and Saturday.
Wow.
2 shows every other night. And if, you committed to it, you were in it. And it was like $480 a week.
But at that time, what year was that?
Pretty good.
That was big money. That was
good.
Around 1968
that was
or
1971.
Oh, 71. Okay.
Yeah. So I said yes, because I'd never made more than $350 a week, and which back then was still good. Most people were making money, 2 or 3. 2 at the was like the average dancer person.
Well, I remember in Los Angeles, where I lived, and you moved to Vegas. I had an apartment at that time, and I paid $100 a month for the apartment.
Yeah,
a 1-bedroom apartment in Glendale, and it was a nice building. So if you're making $480 a week or whatever it was, $400.
My rent here was like $115 a month,
yeah.
And it was like we had free
rich.
Furniture.
You were rich, yeah. So you were only spending a very small portion of your money.
I did feel very, very blessed with the income I made, and so I always was perfectly happy with it, and was able to live quite nicely.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, so Barry and I split up, and I went into the Dunes show, and that was a big change for me, though, because I was working 7 nights a week.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
And you always think, how you get out? You don't meet people. You can't go anywhere. You can't take a trip.
No.
It was like the only time we had off was when the show would close in December. It would usually close for 2 or 3 weeks, where we would either do a new show or they would just revamp the old one, and we'd have maybe a week to go away. Mm-hmm. But then you had to rehearse.
Right.
So, we always opened on my birthday, the day after Christmas.
Uh-huh.
So that was hard, but it was good. And so I went into that show in 71, or late 71, I guess it was. And after, it was December of 74, we were rehearsing a new show. And I was sitting back at the piano with the piano player, because we were rehearsing one day, and I looked up on the risers where the kids were rehearsing their dances, and I see this guy, and it's this big tall guy with his arms out, and it was like I just looked at him and I thought, wow, I hope he's straight.
Right, because most of them were not.
Most of them weren't, no. And it was like, that was the one thing, you never went into work thinking you were going to meet a guy.
Right, right.
So anyway, I looked at him, and I said to the guy at the piano, I said, hey, Ronnie, I said, who's that guy up there? He said, oh, that's just Duke. He said, he used to be in the show before, and he left, but he just came back. And I said, well, is he single? And he said, yeah, I think he is. And I said, good, because I'm going to marry him. So that was in December of 74, and it took me 3 years to get to that point, but I eventually did marry him.
Yeah?
Yeah. He was probably the best thing that's ever happened to me, because he and I were so similar in our thinking, and he was a dancer, singer, and grew up in kind of the same atmosphere that I did. We both were high achievers, and, the oldest kid, and he always wanted to be a singer and a dancer, and he was so supportive of me, which I loved. He was the first guy I ever
He
really...
didn't want you to stay home and make cookies?
No. He was always back in the corner when I was singing, yelling yay, and, saying how good I was and that he loved watching me sing. And I thought, well, that's a plus, because he's not going to try and stop me from having a career.
Yeah.
But I was also, as we started dating, started dating in 1974. And by the time we got married in 1977, I was at that point where I was almost 30 years old. And this was the first man I ever met that I wanted to have a baby with. Mm-hmm. So I knew that, maybe this was going to be a little challenge, because he already had 2 children.
Right.
And he wasn't too high on that subject. But after being with me for, 3 or 4 years, he decided that it was the right thing to do to let me have one baby. Mm-hmm. So in 1977, we got married. In 1978, I left the show because I was pregnant. So I didn't know what would be in future for me in show business, So I left the show and, stayed home, made a baby. Then after that, it was hard because I wasn't sure, what I was going to do. And then I got this call when the baby was like 6 months old from Frederick Apcar. Listen, we'd like you to come back and be a relief girl in the show. And I thought, wow, that'd be fun, because it would only be 2 nights a week. So I could get a babysitter, and I could do that, and it wouldn't be killing me, and I'd make a little money. Well, when I went back, the paycheck for the 2 nights a week was like $450, which was more than what I was making for the 7 nights a week.
Oh, much better job.
It was unbelievable. I thought, what? So I went back, but then the sad part of that little story is that the show only went to 1981, and then it closed for good. Uh-huh. So
why do you think that they closed it?
It had just finished its run, and the hotels had all gotten to the point where so many of them just couldn't afford to house these shows anymore. Most of the shows today are all four-walled, where somebody comes in and has to pay to put their own show in.
Right.
Back then, the hotels paid for the shows, and these shows were so how can I say, high end. It was like, I remember rehearsing for the first edition that I went into. You'd go into a big room in the back of the hotel, and it would be piled high with fox fur and big, huge rhinestones and things, because they imported all this stuff from Europe to make these costumes, and everything was made out of the real thing. Nothing. If it was fur, it was fur. Mm-hmm. It wasn't. Nothing was cheap.
Yeah.
And the sets were all huge, and there were so many people in each show, and at least 15 to 20 numbers. So there was so much money spent, and I think maybe the hotels had gotten to the point where they felt they could spend that money better on something else, and they didn't recoup the money anymore.
Maybe so. If I remember right, didn't the last year or so that you were in that show, didn't they get rid of the live musicians and use playback?
What they did was they still had the live orchestra, but they wanted to use click tracks for a lot of the stuff. And this was something that I was really against, and I did stand up for myself on that, because I said, I can sing. So if I go in there and I make them click tracks for these numbers that I sing background music on,
your
yes,
voice.
They were going to pre-record me singing
and
these numbers, and then I thought, okay, so then they get rid of me and either just play it or they just have some dancer lip sync to me. Mm-hmm. And I told them, I said, I will not put any of my solos on a click track, and I stood for that. And I told them, I said, you want me to sing these songs? Not on a click track. It won't happen. So I sang the group stuff. I didn't mind that, because I figured in a group, it's a group. But I never put a solo on a click track, because I knew that was going to be the next move.
Right.
Because they didn't care, about stuff like that. They were loyal to you to a point.
Right.
But if they thought that they could save money, I always felt, no, that's what would have happened. And a number of people told me that too. They said, don't do it, because you'll be sorry. So meanwhile, while I worked there, I was pregnant the last 5 months I was in that show, and Johnny Haig, who had the relief orchestra in our show, came down to me one night and he said, I know you're going to be leaving the show soon. He said, but, I do a lot of casuals and big hotel parties, and he said, I would love to have you be my vocalist for my band. And I said, well, I don't have any charts. I don't have anything. Everything that I ever sang was owned by these big revues and shows. I'd never been a solo artist that went out and just worked and had charts.
Right.
So he said, oh, don't worry about it. We'll just wing it, So I was 6 or 7 months pregnant when I had my first job with Johnny Haig's orchestra. And it was like a poolside thing at the Sands Hotel or something. And he just asked me what songs I knew, and we'd just wing them. And then he would write a little chart for them. So that's how I started working with this big band. And I loved that job because...
How many people were in the band? About 17 or so?
It was usually he'd work with as little as 15. And, later on, when we'd do big parties at at Caesar's Palace on New Year's Eve or something, he'd add strings, and I'd go in there, and there could be a 35 or 40-piece orchestra.
Oh, wow. That's
so
fun.
It was wonderful for me because I'm a leftover from the big band era. If I had lived in that time, I always felt like that's the time I might have been somebody, because I sing that kind of music very well. I'm comfortable with it. I still listen to Frank Sinatra and Peggy Lee and all those people that I grew up listening to. I just think there's nothing better than that kind of singing.
And you get to pick your own songs.
And I could go into him and say, hey, John, I heard this song. Can we do this? Yeah. And then he'd write me up a little chart, and off we'd go. So it was great because, it really was from 1978, when I was pregnant, through 2006.
And I think I saw your last show with them.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, because by the end, we were doing these big band nights at the old Stardust before they tore it down. We did 1 or 2 there every year where it was free to the public. And all these older people would come in, but they loved it because they would, dance to this big band.
Yeah.
And he always had a vocalist, and he added a boy vocalist too. I always felt lucky to have been there because they said, you can find a big band occasionally places, but I was like one of the last of the people here that had those guys that all worked for Sinatra and Count Basie and, people like that. All his musicians were the musicians that worked with everybody big here in Vegas. Tony Bennett, Natalie Cole. So I just was always happy that I get to put on an evening gown and go out and sit and listen to that big orchestra behind me. It was fun because it wasn't like a real job. It was like we did.
Yeah, it was just occasional.
Yeah,
right?
occasional, and sometimes we'd do 3 or 4 a month, and sometimes we'd do 1 every 3 months. But we did them. And they were for all different kinds of things. You might have a convention in town where there was postal workers or, airline people or car dealers. And then the next one would be for Alan King's big tennis classic. And you'd go in and there'd be every big star in the world there. In the Nevada Lung Association, we used to do all their dinners. And the Nevada Dance Theater Association and things like that where, they'd be recognizing some big star. So that was always fun. So I felt like I never, as a child, I always knew I wanted to grow up and be a singer. But I was happy that I didn't end up having to be a singer that was a star, that was on the road, that was worried about whether or not my next record was going to be a hit or whatever. It was like I just enjoyed the life of a working singer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you made
that
a
people
living
appreciated.
singing.
And I lived a regular life. But I was able to put those evening gowns on and go out there and sing, and it was wonderful. So then when that all came to an end was in around 2006, Johnny got sick. He had cancer, and he died. The band and I always kind of hoped maybe somebody would take it over. We never knew when our last night was because we never really said, this is the end. It just kind of ended. And so then you think, it would have been fun to have somebody take it over. But the hotels really don't like paying for a big orchestra anymore. If they do a party, they hire a DJ or they just play music.
Yeah.
Or they hire a big star who brings in their own music.
Yeah.
So, that was kind of the end of those. I was almost 60 years old when that ended, and I thought I was lucky to have done that my whole life. And meanwhile, I've been a realtor for the last 30 years. And so I had my other career, which I really love. So it wasn't like I was one of those people that thought, oh, God, I'm not a singer anymore.
Yeah,
what am I going to
do now?
Poor
Yeah.
me. No, and I thought I was lucky to have gone that many years and still been able to do it. I was sad to see him gone, and I miss working with those musicians. And every now and then I'll still hear a song in the car and go, ooh, I'd like to do that, but there's no place to do it.
Right. Karaoke nights.
Yeah, karaoke nights. But then you go to karaoke, and most of the people are singing stuff that you're thinking, if I got up there and sang what I know, they'd think I was corny, Or you watch the voice shows and all that, and you think, I'm really kind of passé now, and I realize that. Because so many people, as they get older, I see them, they're still out there trying to, do their thing, and it's like unless you go into one of those old folk shows or something,
right,
nobody really wants to hear it. So I always felt like it was nice to just let it go and realize that was my career and it's over. Our son, JT, who you did a podcast.
JT Mollner, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you did a podcast. He is a talented director. He keeps telling me he's got a great script that he is going to turn into a movie, and he wants me to sing in that movie. And I thought, well, that'll be fun, So to do something like that occasionally would be fun. But I did play with things like going on The Voice or going on, what was the one?
America's Got Talent or something?
Yeah, or America's Got Talent. But what's the other one? The X Factor was one,
right,
too. That was the first one that allowed people to come on at any age. And I did go down there about, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, and auditioned for them, and I made it to the second round. And then I remember sitting there thinking, oh, God, what if I make it further? Do I really want to do this?
I'll have to leave home.
I thought, no, maybe I like my new life.
Right.
I thought I don't want to go back to 7 days a week again.
Right.
It's like you hit a point and you go, wait a minute. It's like your inner child is still saying, I want to see if they like me. Mm-hmm. But your smart adult is saying, I don't want that job.
Right.
I don't want them to.
Yeah, it's a commitment.
It is.
Yeah.
And I'm done with that. I mean, I like my new life. I like singing in the car. I'm big on the shower. Mm-hmm. And I always felt very lucky that I had the career I had because it was really the one I wanted. I didn't want to be somebody on the road. I don't want to be a big star that everybody knows everything you do and scrutinizes you. And,
right.
I really like my private little world.
Yeah.
So, but that's basically where it's at. So someday maybe I'll sing in JT's movie. And then my husband has this haunted house business, too.
Yeah, I'm going to try to snag him and do an interview with him because he this is a very interesting thing. So just tell us a little bit about how that started and where it ended up.
Well,
I
won't tell you too much, but it all started because he and I were in that show at the Dunes, and we only had one night a week off, and we happened to get a Wednesday night off, which was Halloween. And he said, hey, it's Halloween. We got to do something. So do something. I thought he meant dress up and go somewhere.
Right.
No, he's out in the backyard building a coffin. And he ended up putting it in our entry hall of our house. And we dressed up like Dracula and his, girlfriend.
Yeah.
And he had a 10-year-old son that we dressed him up like that, too. And it was like that was the small start of it, which then the next year turned into we have to do something again. Let's get Halloween off. And so we were doing this in our house. But I want him to tell you the story of how eventually,
right,
he discovered that there might be something in this that could be lucrative.
Right.
And something that he loved. He loves scaring people. He thinks that's the funnest thing that ever happened. And so does our son.
And he does it well.
Yes. And
so now you guys have one of the top 10 most popular, successful...
They wrote us up as one of the top 5 scariest haunted houses in the world. So when you think of that, it's like that's the beauty of today's world that we have the internet. Because if there was no internet, no one would know about us.
Yeah.
Right. But people go in and they search, where are the haunted houses? Where do people have stuff? And they find us. And we're basically the proudest of the fact that we are a little mom and pop thing. We're not
just you and him.
Yeah, we're
and
not
your
Universal
son.
Studios or we're some little mom and pop thing in this little tiny, but it's a big operation for what it is, but it's very small. everybody that comes that comes to not interview it, but what am I saying? To review it. They don't always tell you who they are, but they come from these haunt magazines and these haunt groups and all that. After they go through, then they'll tell you. And the reviews on us, I mean, if you go to freaklingbros.com, freaklingbros.com, you will see some of these reviews, and it's mind-boggling. They think we're the best there is.
You in one location on a big parking lot, you have three
haunted houses, and we change them periodically. Like every 5 years, we'll go in and remodel one and give it a new name and change it up. Right now we've got the Gates of Hell, which is our R-rated haunt, and that's the only one in the West Coast that is that. It's like you have to sign a waiver when you go in, and there's things that happen to you in there that are very adult. It's not X-rated. That's what people have to understand. There's no nudity. There's no, it's not like a sexual thing, but it's very, very adult.
It's mature.
And very mature and very dark. Very dark. And then there's Castle Vampire, which is the one that is the most family friendly. I mean, but we don't let anybody go in that's under 9 years old.
Okay.
And then the other one is our Coven of 13, which is a strange take on witches. Last year was one of our best years ever.
Yeah, it was a very successful year, right?
People love it. People that like to be scared. I'm one of the whack jobs that does not like to be scared. We've been doing this business since early in 1992 was when they built the first one, but I've never been in them.
Oh, really?
No.
You've never been in one? Well, you're too busy out there raking in the dough.
I sell the tickets.
You take the money.
I take the money. Yeah, I said, I'll do that. I'll do anything they want me to do to help, but I don't like to be scared, and I will never understand why people come up and beg for it. Here they are. They come up and they pay me to go in and have somebody scare the crap out of them.
Right.
And they love it.
And this goes on from, is it October 1st?
Yeah, we usually open either the last weekend in September and go all through October. Halloween's always our closing night.
Right.
So, I feel like I've had a very interesting life, You
have had an interesting and successful
and it's still
life.
Going.
Yeah, and you guys are still doing the haunted house.
Yes,
I mean, I think your guys going to do that for...
Yeah, my husband and I are, we're in our 70s, and we both feel like we don't like the word retirement. He still deals baccarat at the Bellagio, and we do the haunted houses, and I still sell real estate. We have always said that until we don't like what we're doing or we're too decrepit to do it, we're just going to keep working.
Well,
because I think it keeps you young and happy.
Sure.
And it's nice to not be wondering, how you're going to feed yourselves every week. So, we're just going to keep going and feel very, very blessed.
And JT Mollner, your son, the director, he is also involved. He manages the thing.
He's a manager of one of them, and he's also very, very into the design. He's the one that has put us on the map as far as social media and all those things that Duke and I are not that adept at. So he's been a great help. So without him, we probably wouldn't have continued it this long.
Right.
Because he's, he loves it too. He loves it. So who knows? It may go on even after we're gone.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Jeff will keep it going.
He might, because he really loves it. So, so that's my life.
That's about your life, huh? Okay, well, this has been interesting, and I've actually learned a few things that I didn't even know about you, and refreshed my memory, because I went through all this stuff with you. Like when you came up to Vegas, I used to come up and visit you all the time.
Right. But you were so young.
I was so young, so I couldn't come into the showrooms.
Right.
But you would...
Didn't I get you in the light booth?
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes?
I would come up and I'd sit up in the light booth and I'd watch all the naked women running around, and it was really fun.
I'm sure.
And get to see you sing and hear the bands, because I was a drummer.
Right.
And I was like really interested in... the music part of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was great. And, but I always avoided moving to Vegas.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I had stuff going in LA. And
you can still do that, It costs a lot less to live here.
Yes. Good. Yeah, just got to convince the rest of the family to move.
I know. It's crazy, because there's a lot of people doing that now. I mean, we're seeing more and more, especially after these fires.
Oh, yeah.
Our son was in that fire. You were in the heart of it, too.
It's close to it, Had to evacuate. Okay, well, we'll call it quits. Thank you, Ginny Pallone Mollner.
Thank
Ginnie
you.
Pallone was your stage name.
Yes, and my maiden name.
And
our
your
name.
maiden, yeah,
Yes.
our maiden name. So that's why we throw that in there, because Mollner was not. So anybody that saw you back in those days, they would have known you as Ginnie
Right,
Pallone.
and
not,
it's Mollner, Mollner. People always get that one confused with Mollner, Mueller, Muller.
yeah, right.
And Pallone is Pallone, Pallone.
Yeah, there's lots of names. Yeah. All right. All right, Ginny. Well, we're going to go out to dinner now.
Yes, we
So
are.
let's
Let's
go.
go do it.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everybody. The Ross Around Backstage podcast wants to thank the group Frame by Frame for the bumper music you are listening to now. Please subscribe to my podcast so you won't miss another new episode in the future. I'm also looking for sponsors for the Ross Around Backstage podcast. Please email me at rosspallone@me.com. Remember to click the like button, and thanks for listening.